Reed ripped the medical chart from her hands and threw it across the room. It hit the wall. Pages scattered across the floor in front of 42 candidates who stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. "Get out!" His voice was ice. "You don't belong in this room anymore." Claire Morgan did not flinch, did not blink, did not move a single muscle in her face. She looked at him the way a person looks at something small that has made a very loud noise. The silence that followed was the kind that breaks people. It did not break her. Because Reed had no idea, not even close, who he had just done that to. If this story hits you somewhere real, subscribe to the channel and follow Claire's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The day Claire Morgan came back to the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility at Little Creek, Virginia, she arrived 20 minutes before anyone else. She always did. Old habit. Old training. The kind of instinct that doesn't leave your body, even when your body has been broken open and stitched back together by strangers in a forward operating base hospital 3,000 miles from home. She set her gear bag down in the equipment room. She checked her supplies in the same order she always checked them: field dressings, pressure bandages, airway kit, tourniquet stock. The secondary kit that most instructors forgot to verify because they assumed someone else had done it. She found one tourniquet with a cracked windlass rod. She replaced it without saying anything to anyone. She logged it. She moved on. That was Claire Morgan in a single motion. Quiet. Thorough. Already 3 steps ahead of the problem before the problem knew it existed. She wasn't supposed to be here according to a lot of people. Not on this base. Not in this role. Not still wearing the uniform after what had happened to her shoulder, to what the surgical report called a catastrophic rotator cuff rupture and associated nerve damage sustained during operational deployment, which was the Navy's careful, bloodless way of saying she had been ripped apart holding a man's body weight above an extraction rope while under fire in conditions that were never going to be discussed in any public document. 6 months of rehabilitation, 3 surgical procedures, 41 weeks of physical therapy that left her crying in the car more mornings than she would ever admit to another living person. And then she came back. Not to operational duty, not to the teams. She came back here to this training facility to teach the next generation of candidates how to keep people alive in conditions that wanted very badly to kill them. Tactical medical instruction. That was her official role. It sounded quiet. It sounded safe. It sounded like exactly the kind of assignment the Navy gave you when they'd decided you were finished but weren't quite ready to say it to your face. Most of the senior staff treated her with a particular kind of careful politeness, the sort of politeness that has distance built into it. The sort that says, "We respect what you did. We're sorry about what happened. Now please stay inside the lines we've drawn for you." The younger candidates were less polite. They were 23, 24 years old. They were lean and fast and burning with the certainty that only young men who haven't yet been genuinely destroyed can feel. They looked at Claire, and they saw a woman in her late 30s with a shoulder that moved wrong when the weather changed and a teaching role that kept her out of the field. They saw the edges of what she was, the quietness, the economy of motion, the way she never raised her voice, and they read it as limitation. She had heard the whispers. She heard everything. That was another old habit she'd never lost. You think she was actually operational? Medic man, that's different. She doesn't even look like... Relax, she's fine for what she does. Fine for what she does. 6 words that contained a whole architecture of dismissal. And then there was Captain Mason Reed. Reed was 36, which made him technically younger than Claire, though you would never know it from the way he moved through the training facility, like he had been installed there, like the space had been designed specifically to contain him. He was broad-shouldered and loud in the way that certain men are loud, not because they need to fill silence, but because they have learned that sound is a form of ownership. He spoke, and people moved. He made assessments, and people accepted them. He was good at his job, genuinely good, and he knew it the way a hammer knows what it's made for. He'd been at Little Creek for 4 years. He'd run good candidates through hard programs and turned out solid operators. He had never been wrong about someone's potential in a way that cost him anything visible. He was wrong about Claire Morgan from the first day she arrived. Not dramatically wrong, not in a way that made a scene. He was wrong in the specific, efficient way of someone who makes a quick read and files it, and never thinks to revisit it. He looked at her assignment, her injury report, her current role, and he reached a conclusion. Injured, limited, desk-bound in all the ways that mattered. A resource to be managed rather than a person to be reckoned with. He was professional about it. He never said anything cruel to her face, not at first. He just had a way of talking around her in briefings, of addressing questions about tactical medical protocol to anyone in the room except her, of pausing almost imperceptibly when she made a suggestion the way you pause before deciding not to answer. Claire noticed. She noticed, and she let it go. She had learned in the years before this assignment that the most effective response to being underestimated was not to argue. It was to wait. She was very, very good at waiting. The first real confrontation happened 3 weeks into her posting during a combat trauma simulation that Reed was running for a group of second-phase candidates. The scenario involved a mock firefight. Candidates moving through a building simulated casualties' time pressure on extraction and treatment. Standard stuff. The kind of exercise Claire had participated in from the other side 100 times in her life. She was there as a medical observer, which meant she watched, she documented, and she would debrief afterward. That was the role she'd been given. That was the lane she was supposed to stay in. One of the candidates, a big capable kid named Kowalski, who moved well and thought too slowly, made a decision during the scenario that was going to get his simulated casualty killed. He chose to move the body before stabilizing the airway. Classic mistake. The kind of mistake that happens when adrenaline overrides training, when the instinct to do something overrules the discipline to do the right thing first. Claire said clearly and without hesitation, "Kowalski, stop, airway first." Kowalski stopped. He looked at her. He was breathing hard from the exercise, and for a half-second she could see him doing the calculation. Who is she? Does she outrank me here? Do I listen? She's right, said another candidate quieter. You were going to lose the airway. Kowalski reset. He corrected the procedure. The scenario continued. Reed stopped the drill. Hold. He looked across the room at Claire. There was something careful and controlled in his expression, the face of a man deciding how to handle a thing. Sergeant Morgan. He said her name the way you'd place an object on a table. Firm. Final. Slightly removed from warmth. Your role in this exercise is observation and documentation. I saw a critical error in progress, and there is a process for. He was going to move a casualty with an unsecured airway. In a real scenario, that candidate would have killed his wounded teammate in the first 40 seconds. The room was very quiet now. 42 candidates who had learned the specific skill of not looking at things they weren't supposed to look at suddenly found reasons to examine their boots, their equipment, the middle distance. Reed stepped toward ye. Not aggressively, he was too controlled for that, but with deliberate weight. I appreciate the intervention, Sergeant, but interrupting a running exercise compromises the integrity of the evaluation. There's a debrief process. You use the debrief process. Claire looked at him. The debrief process is useful when the mistake hasn't killed anyone yet. Something moved behind Reed's eyes. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being answered. With respect, he said, and the pause after those 2 words was a small door closing. Your experience level in live operational environments is what, Captain? Another pause. Longer. He changed direction. Maybe certain aspects of active instruction are better left to personnel who are currently cleared for full operational duty. He said it evenly. He said it like it was reasonable. He said it like he was doing her a favor by saying it gently. Teaching from the sidelines isn't a diminishment. It's appropriate calibration. Teaching from the sidelines. She heard the words land. She felt them. She knew exactly what they were designed to do, and she refused to let them do it, not visibly, not in front of 42 people who were watching her from behind their careful downward gazes. "Noted," she said, and that was all. No anger, no argument, no visible crack in anything. She went back to her documentation clipboard and she wrote down Kowalski's error and the timestamp and the corrective action taken, and she didn't look at Reed again. But later, walking back to the administration building alone, she let herself feel it for exactly 45 seconds. The familiar ache of it. The way dismissal from certain people in certain uniforms could still reach places in her chest that she thought she'd armored years ago. 45 seconds. Then she filed it. Then she moved on. That was the other thing nobody knew about Claire Morgan. She had an almost surgical relationship with her own pain. She could feel it completely, and then set it down with a precision that had taken years of very hard living to develop. She had learned that skill in places she couldn't talk about. What nobody at Little Creek knew with the base roster and the medical records and Reed's careful assessments and the candidates' locker room conversations had no way of capturing was the version of Claire Morgan that existed before the shoulder, before the injury, before the extraction rope and the forward operating base and the surgical team who worked on her for 4 hours, while a chaplain sat in a hallway nearby because someone had made an early assessment about her odds. Before all of that, there had been a different Claire Morgan. She had entered the Navy at 22, with a degree in biochemistry and a physical assessment score that placed her in the top 4% of all candidates that year, male or female. She went through basic training. She went through field medical. She discovered she had a specific and unusual talent. She could stay perfectly calm when everything around her was falling apart. Not just calm, functional, clear. Faster under pressure than she was under normal conditions, as though her body ran on chaos the way other people's bodies ran on caffeine. That talent brought her to the attention of people whose job was to notice unusual talents. She completed training processes that she was never permitted to describe in unclassified conversation. She deployed to locations that appeared nowhere on her official service record as operational assignments. She did things, specific, precise, often brutal things, in defense of other people's lives, that would have earned her recognition and rank and ceremony if they had been allowed to be acknowledged. They were not acknowledged. That was the deal. You understand the deal when you accept it. You understand that the work you do will be real, and the records will be quiet, and the people you save will go home and tell their families they were rescued and will never know your name. You accept that. Some people accept it easily. Claire had accepted it because the work itself was enough. Because when you are genuinely skilled at something, and that something matters, you don't always need anyone else to know it. She had operated in 2 hemispheres. She had worked alongside men, always men, until the program cautiously began to change who started every interaction with her at a distance of skepticism, and ended most of them at something close to respect. She had been the first person into situations that senior operators twice her experience had hesitated on. She had pulled people out of circumstances that were by every reasonable metric unrecoverable. And then the last mission, the one she thought about every day. She didn't think about it continuously. She'd done enough of the right therapeutic work to understand that continuous rumination was a trap, not a tribute. But it was always there, the way a healed bone is always aware of the break. The way the body remembers even when the mind tries to give it structure. The mission itself was classified at a level that meant she had never discussed it with anyone who wasn't already inside the information. What she was permitted to carry in the non-classified architecture of her own memory was this: a team 7 people, an extraction that went wrong in a particular and catastrophic way, a choice she had made that most people in her position would not have made, and the physical consequence of that choice on her left shoulder and the left side of her life. She had stayed behind when she should have gone. She had held a position she should have abandoned. She had made it possible for 6 other people to get out of a situation that would otherwise have killed all 7 of them. And then she had survived, which sometimes felt like the most complicated part. 3 weeks after the confrontation during the simulation, a second-phase candidate named Torres collapsed during a night physical training evolution. It happened fast, the way real things always happen, without announcement, without transition. One moment Torres was running, and the next he was on the ground, and the candidates around him were doing the thing that untrained people do, which is gather and stare and wait for someone else to act. Claire was 50 yards away when she heard the change in the sound of the group. Not a shout, she was already moving before anyone shouted. She heard the shift, the sudden collective stillness in human movement, and her body responded before her conscious mind had finished processing. She reached Torres in 11 seconds. He was conscious, but confused. His skin was wrong, clammy and pale, in the wrong combination for simple exhaustion. His breathing was irregular. His pulse, when she found it, was rapid and weak in a specific pattern that told her something before any equipment could confirm it. Torres, stay with me. Can you tell me where you feel it? Chest. His voice was thin. And my arms. Both arms. Left one. Yeah. She had her kit open before he finished the sentence. She was talking to the supervisor behind her without looking away from Torres. Get the AED from the equipment shed. Tell them suspected cardiac event. I need that here in 90 seconds. He's 23. 90 seconds. No raise in her voice, just absolute certainty about what was real and what mattered. She kept Torres talking. She kept him still. She managed his breathing rate with specific instructions, not because she needed to calm him, but because controlling breathing rate affects cardiac workload, and she knew exactly how much it mattered in the next 8 minutes. She did 4 different things simultaneously in the way that people who have managed genuine medical emergencies in hostile environments learn to do: monitoring, communicating, treating, preparing. And she did all 4 of them with a quietness that was itself a kind of authority. When the AED arrived, she deployed it with movements that were so economical and precise that Sergeant Dale Hatcher, who had been standing 6 feet back watching, found himself unable to speak for a moment. Hatcher had been in the Navy for 19 years. He'd seen competent people work under pressure. What he was watching was not competence. It was something beyond competence, the particular mastery that only comes from having done a thing in real conditions where the cost of error is irreversible. "Who taught you cardiac stabilization?" he said, almost involuntarily. Claire didn't look up. "Experience." "Where?" She didn't answer. She was listening to Torres's breathing, making adjustments, preparing the handoff for the medical team that was now arriving from the base clinic. Torres survived. He was transported. He was later diagnosed with a congenital cardiac condition that would have killed him that night without intervention. The base clinic physician who received him pulled the responding supervisor aside afterward and said very quietly, "Whoever stabilized that candidate in the field saved his life." Not figuratively. Literally. The intervention in the first 6 minutes made the difference. That story moved through the base in the specific way that stories move when they carry real weight. The next morning, Captain Reed stopped in the hallway outside the medical instruction office. Claire was inside reviewing curriculum materials for an upcoming session. She didn't look up when she heard him at the door. "Morgan." "Captain." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him doing the recalibration she'd seen it before in other men in other contexts. The particular internal renegotiation of someone who has been shown without argument that they were wrong. "Torres is going to be all right," he said. "I know. I checked with the clinic this morning. The physician said your intervention was—" He stopped, started again. It was significant. She set her papers down. She looked at him. "I know what I did, Captain." "I'm not questioning. You questioned it 3 weeks ago," she said. Not with heat, not with accusation, just with the same directness she applied to everything. "You told me in front of 42 candidates that maybe I should teach from the sidelines. I want to be clear that I'm not raising that to embarrass you. I'm raising it because what you said affected those candidates' perception of the instruction they receive. And that matters more to me than whether we like each other." Reed stood very still. "You're right," he said. He said it simply. She hadn't expected that. Most people, when confronted with a truth they don't want, find a way to qualify it, deflect it, fold it into something more manageable. Reed just said, "You're right." She looked at him for a moment longer than she intended. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like to observe your next session, if that's acceptable." She nodded. "It's open to all base personnel." He left. She went back to her curriculum. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the conversation, some particular charge, and she sat with it for a moment before she could focus again. She wasn't sure if Reed was changing his mind about her. She was certain it wouldn't last anyway, because there were things she hadn't told him, things nobody here knew. And when those things eventually surfaced, and she had learned through very hard experience that the past always surfaced, eventually the shift in the room wouldn't be a simple recalibration. It would be something much larger, something she was not yet ready to face. That evening, alone in her quarters, Claire Morgan opened the small locked box she kept in the bottom drawer of her personal footlocker. Inside were 3 photographs and a folded piece of paper that she had been carrying for almost 2 years. She didn't look at the photographs very often. When she did, she let herself see them fully, not quickly, not at a glance. She owed the people in those photographs that much. She owed them the full weight of her attention. 6 faces in the photographs. Her team. The people she'd gone into the last mission with, the people she'd gotten out. They were alive because of the choice she'd made. They were living their lives, some of them still operational. She knew one of them now, an instructor himself. 2 who had left the service, and none of them knew or could ever know the specific dimensions of what she carried in relation to them. The folded piece of paper was a letter. She had written it to herself in the hospital during the 3rd week of recovery, when the surgical outcome was still uncertain, and the question of whether she would have full shoulder function again was genuinely open. She wrote it because her therapist, a direct and excellent woman named Dr. Carmichael, had told her that articulating a commitment during crisis had measurable effects on long-term behavioral follow-through, and Claire responded to evidence-based recommendations the way she responded to most things, by doing exactly what was recommended precisely and without sentiment. The letter said in her own handwriting words that she had never shown anyone. "I am going back because the ones who come after us need someone who has actually been there. Not someone who read about it. Not someone who survived the classroom version. Someone who went all the way in and came back with the real knowledge. I am going back because that is the only way any of this means anything. The injury is not the end of the story. It is the turning point. And I have earned the right to decide what happens next." She read it. She folded it back up. She put it away. She lay in the dark and thought about Torres, who was going to be fine, and about Kowalski, who had almost made a mistake that would have mattered, and about Reed, who had said, "You're right," in a hallway with more honesty than she had expected. She thought about what was coming, because something was always coming. That was the nature of places like this. Pressure built until it released, and when it released, it revealed what things were actually made of. She had seen it happen in environments with much higher stakes than a training facility. She had seen people discover who they were under conditions that didn't allow for pretending. Something was going to test this unit. She didn't know the shape of it yet. She didn't know the timeline. But she had been in enough situations to feel it the way you feel a weather change in an old injury, not painfully, just with certainty. She was ready. She had been ready for longer than anyone here understood. And when the moment came, she would do what she had always done. She would be exactly where she was needed, doing exactly what was required, while the people around her were still catching up to what was actually happening. Because that was who Claire Morgan was. Not the injured woman. Not the instructor on the sidelines. Not the careful, quiet presence that people looked past on their way to finding someone more impressive. She was the person who had stayed behind when everyone else had gotten out, and she was still here. That fact alone should have told them everything. She was back in the equipment room at 05:30 the next morning, same as every morning, doing the same check she always did, methodical, unhurried, thorough, in a way that had nothing to do with regulation and everything to do with who she was at a structural level. She found 2 expired saline bags that should have been rotated out 3 days ago. She replaced them. She logged them. She did not report anyone for the oversight because her goal was never to create problems for people. Her goal was to prevent people from dying, and those two things required entirely different instincts. Hatcher was waiting for her when she came out of the storage corridor. Dale Hatcher was not a man who waited for people. He was 51 years old and had spent most of those years in motion deployments, training cycles the particular restless energy of someone whose body had been trained to anticipate threat and never quite learned to stand down. He had an honest face, weathered in the way of someone who had spent real time outdoors in conditions that weren't recreational. And when he looked at you, he did it directly without the social performance of looking away and back that most people use to manage discomfort. He was looking at her directly now. "I've been thinking about Torres," he said. "He's stable. The clinic updated his chart last night." "That's not what I mean." Hatcher fell into step beside her. "I've been thinking about what I watched you do out there. I've been in this program 19 years. I've seen people work a medical emergency. What I watched you do was different. I've had a lot of practice." Where? She didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the strap on her kit bag. She looked at the path ahead of them rather than at him. "Field experience," she said. "That's not an answer, Morgan." "It's the answer I have." Hatcher was quiet for a few steps. Then, "I pulled your file." She stopped walking. "The accessible portion," he clarified, "which isn't much. Most of it's redacted. I mean seriously redacted, not the standard privacy redactions. The kind that require a clearance level I don't have and probably never will. Your operational history is basically a series of black bars with your name on either end." She looked at him. She waited. "Who are you?" he said, not unkindly, just with the directness of someone who had decided that indirection was a waste of the time they both had. "I'm the tactical medical instructor assigned to this unit. Come on, Hatcher." "Torres has a mother," he said. "She called the base clinic this morning. They told her that the initial stabilization was critical to the outcome. She asked for the name of the person who did it. The clinic didn't give it to her because they didn't know if you'd want that, but she wanted to say thank you to whoever it was." He paused. "You saved a 23-year-old kid's life last night. You did it with the kind of precision that doesn't come from a textbook. I'm not asking because I want to get into your business. I'm asking because I think the people in this unit deserve to know who's standing next to them." Claire stood very still. Something moved in her chest, not pain exactly, but the weight of what he'd said, pressing against things she kept carefully contained. Torres's mother. That detail was the one that reached her. Not the assessment of her skills, not the question about her history. The mother on the phone in the morning, trying to understand how her son was still alive. "I can't tell you what you want to know," she said. "Not because I don't trust you. Because I'm not authorized. Classified." "Most of it. Yes." "Most of it," he repeated. "Which means some of it isn't." She almost smiled. "Almost. You're not going to let this go." "I'm 51 years old and I've been doing this long enough to know when something matters. This matters." She looked at him for a long moment. "I was operational," she said. "Before the injury. Beyond what's on the accessible record. Beyond what you can see in the file. What I did, and where I did it, and with who, none of that is mine to share. But the skills are mine, and I'm using them. That's all you need to know." Hatcher nodded slowly. Not satisfied, she could see he wasn't satisfied, but accepting. He was a man who understood that some walls existed for reasons, and that pushing through them didn't always get you something useful. "Fair enough," he said. "But for what it's worth, and I know this isn't what you're here for, I see you. Okay, I see what you're doing here and what it's worth. Even if nobody else does yet." She held that, just for a moment. Let it land where it was meant to land. "Get your candidates ready for the morning session," she said. "I want them sharp." He nodded. He turned away. She watched him go and thought one person. Out of this entire facility, one person was paying the kind of attention that mattered. It was she decided enough for now. Again. The morning session was a trauma management exercise built around a mass casualty scenario. Multiple simultaneous injuries, limited resources, time pressure, the deliberate chaos of competing priorities that real situations always generated. Claire ran it the way she ran everything, without drama, without theatrics, with a clarity of expectation that made the candidates understand very quickly that she was not going to manage their anxiety for them. She was going to require them to manage it themselves. She paired the candidates deliberately. She put the most confident ones with the ones who thought too slowly under pressure, not because confidence was wrong, but because unchecked confidence in a medical scenario had specific and predictable failure modes that needed a counterweight. She put Kowalski with a candidate named Reyes, who was methodical to the point of slowness, but never under any conditions made a procedural error. "They're going to drive each other crazy," Hatcher said quietly, standing beside her. "That's the point," she said. "Kowalski needs to slow down. Reyes needs to speed up. Put them together, and they either find the middle or they destroy each other. Either way, something real happens. And if they destroy each other, then we find out before it costs anyone anything. That's what training is for." Halfway through the exercise, Kowalski made exactly the mistake she'd predicted. He moved fast, he moved right, and he skipped a step. A specific step. The step that looked like a formality until it wasn't. She let him get 3 seconds into the error before she said, "Kowalski, what did you skip?" He stopped. He reviewed his actions. She watched his face as the realization moved through it, not just the recognition of the error, but the deeper recognition of why it mattered, which was the more important lesson. "Secondary assessment," he said. "Why does that matter right now?" "Because—" He looked at his simulated casualty. "Because if there's a second injury I missed moving him could kill him," she said simply. "Not make it worse. Kill him. Say the true thing. Could kill him. Correct. Now do it right." Reyes, kneeling on the other side of the casualty, said nothing, but she saw him file it. She saw the way careful, methodical minds absorbed lessons differently from the fast ones, more completely, more permanently. Reed appeared at the edge of the exercise area. He had said he wanted to observe. She'd noted his arrival without looking at him directly, the way she'd always cataloged the position and movement of people in her environment. Old training. He stood back. He watched. He was doing something she hadn't entirely expected from him, which was the discipline of genuine observation, not watching to evaluate her, but watching to learn what was actually happening. She ran the exercise for 90 more minutes. When it was over, she ran the debrief with the same precision she applied to everything else. She named specific decisions. She named the moments where those decisions had either preserved or endangered the simulated casualties. She did not soften the analysis for comfort. She did not raise her voice to make a point. She let the facts carry their own weight, which they always did if you trusted them enough to present them straight. When the candidates were dismissed and filtering out, Reed approached her. "That was not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He paused. "Honestly, something more basic. Classroom-level instruction with a field backdrop. That's not what the candidates need." "No," he said. "It isn't." He looked toward where the group was dispersing. "The Kowalski correction. The way you handled that, you let him run into the wall himself. You didn't stop him before the error. Why? Because stopping him before the error teaches him to wait for external intervention. Letting him find the error himself teaches him to build the internal check. One of those is useful in training. The other is useful in the field." Reed was quiet for a moment. She could hear him reassessing not her exactly, but the shape of what she understood, the depth of it. "Where did you learn to teach?" he said. "I learned to survive," she said. "Teaching is just surviving in a different form." He looked at her, not the careful, managed look he'd given her before, not the look that kept distance inside it. A different look. The look of someone who has begun to suspect they've been reading a map wrong and is only now understanding the scale of the error. "Morgan." "Captain, I have a curriculum review at 1400. If there's something operationally urgent, I'm available. Otherwise—" "It's not operationally urgent," he said. He stopped. He was not accustomed to not knowing how to finish a sentence. She could see the discomfort of it on him. "I owe you a better version of the conversation we had 3 weeks ago." "You apologized." "I made a statement. That's different from a conversation." He looked at her directly. "I'd like to understand what I actually missed. Not for my ego, for the candidates. They need—" He stopped again, tried it differently. "You know things that the people in this unit need to know. I can see that now. And I let my assumptions about your situation get in the way of that. So I want to understand what I missed." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ask me a specific question," she said. "I'll tell you what I can." He thought about it. Then, the Torah's intervention. "You knew it was cardiac before any equipment confirmed it. How? Pattern recognition from prior exposure to similar presentations. In a training environment?" She said nothing. He waited. Then he understood that the silence was itself an answer. The kind of answer that confirmed things he'd been beginning to suspect, but hadn't yet articulated. "Operational environment," he said quietly. She said nothing. He nodded slowly. He started to say something else, then stopped. He nodded once more and left. She watched him go and thought he's starting to ask the right questions. The problem with that was that the right questions led to answers she wasn't authorized to give him. And the answers she wasn't authorized to give him were becoming increasingly relevant to what was happening in this facility, in this unit with these candidates. She had a feeling that the gap between what she could say and what needed to be known was going to close very soon, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what would happen when it did. The second major exercise of the week was a joint training operation, a large-scale scenario involving 2 full candidate groups running a coordinated mission with real-time pressure and genuinely unscripted variables. Reed had designed it. It was, she had to acknowledge, a well-constructed scenario complex enough to reveal real gaps, controlled enough to be safe, with enough moving parts to generate the kind of authentic confusion that training needed if it was going to mean anything. She was there as medical oversight. Her role was to manage any genuine health incidents and to evaluate the medical decision-making of the candidates under pressure. She was not in the command structure of the exercise. That was Reed's space, and she had no interest in crowding it. What she did was stand where she could see the most. Another old habit. In any environment, in any operation, she had always found the position that offered the widest field of observation and stood there quietly reading everything. 20 minutes in, she noticed something. One of the candidate teams, the Eastern Element, 8 people moving through a building clearance scenario, was operating on bad information. She could see it in the pattern of their movement. They were responding to a set of conditions that no longer existed in the scenario, because the simulated opposition had adapted in a way the Eastern Element's communication lag hadn't accounted for. They were walking into a coordination failure, not a dangerous one. This was training. The physical risk was managed, but a complete mission failure. They were going to reach their objective and find it already compromised, and they weren't going to understand why, and the lesson would be diffuse and hard to extract, because the failure was going to look like an execution problem when it was actually an intelligence problem. She watched Reed. He was at the command center managing the macro view. He hadn't caught it yet. The pace of the scenario was giving him too much to process, and the Eastern Element was one stream among 6. She picked up the radio. She was not supposed to be on the command channel. Her role was medical. She keyed it anyway. Eastern Element is responding to a stale picture. Opposition has moved to the secondary position. They need updated guidance before they reach checkpoint 3. A pause. Then Reed's voice. "Who is this on command channel?" "Morgan. You have 30 seconds before Eastern Element reaches checkpoint 3 with no valid intelligence." Another pause. She could feel him making the decision verify her assessment against his own view, push back on the protocol breach or trust it. He trusted it. Eastern Element stand by. Command update inbound. He redirected them. They adjusted. They reached checkpoint 3 with current intelligence and executed the objective correctly. Afterward, in the debrief, Reed looked at her across the room. "You were on the wrong channel," he said. "Yes. I should probably document that. Your call." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "How did you see the intelligence failure? You weren't plugged into the scenario feeds. You were standing in the medical observation position. I watched their movement pattern. When a team is responding to stale information, the pattern has a specific quality. They're moving with confidence, but they're moving toward a position the environment no longer supports. It looks like competence from the outside. But there's a half-beat delay in the adaptation response that tells you they haven't received the update." The room was absolutely silent. Every candidate in the debrief. Every senior instructor. Hatcher, who was watching her with the expression of someone whose private hypothesis was being confirmed in real time. Reed said very carefully, "That level of situational reading, the ability to identify intelligence failure by movement analysis, that's not standard medical training." "No," she said, "it's not." "Where does it come from?" She looked at him. She let the silence sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. "Experience," she said. The same word she'd given Hatcher. The same word that meant I was somewhere doing something that I am not permitted to describe to you. And it left marks on me that cannot be explained by my official record. This time, the silence in the room had a different texture. She could feel the shift in it. Candidates looking at each other. Hatcher looking at Reed. Reed looking at her. Something was changing. She could feel it, the way she felt weather in the old shoulder injury. The particular pressure of a thing arriving. That night, a candidate named Vasquez caught her in the corridor outside the medical supply room. Vasquez was 24, small and precise in her movements, with a quality of attention that Claire had noticed early in the cycle. She was not the fastest candidate. She was not the strongest. But she processed information in the way that actually mattered in the field completely, without filtering out the parts that made her uncomfortable. "Sergeant Morgan." Vasquez stopped. She looked like she'd been deciding whether to do this for a while and had finally committed. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "When you corrected me yesterday, in the secondary assessment exercise." She stopped, tried it differently. "You told me that I was treating the documentation protocol like a bureaucratic requirement rather than a diagnostic tool." "I remember. I've been thinking about that for 24 hours. I've been through 3 textbooks trying to find a different explanation for—" She stopped again. "What you said was right. I've been doing the documentation because I'm supposed to, not because I understand what it tells me. And that means I'm—" She stopped a third time. "Missing half the information," Claire said. "Yes." "Sit down with me for a minute." They found a bench in the corridor. Claire walked her through it. Not the textbook version, not the regulation version, but the real version. The version that explained why each element of the assessment protocol connected to a specific piece of information that you needed to make the right decision at the right moment. She talked about it the way she talked about everything directly, without condescension, with the specificity of someone who had applied these principles in conditions where getting them wrong had consequences that mattered. Vasquez listened. The way good candidates listened totally without the performance of note-taking, just with her full attention on the content. "You've done this in a real casualty situation," Vasquez said. Not a question. "Yes." "More than once." "Yes." "Where?" "I can't tell you that." Vasquez nodded. She absorbed it. Then, "Was it?" She paused, choosing the word carefully. "Was it worth it? Doing the work that you did? The work that got classified? The work that—" She gestured at Claire's left shoulder without looking at it directly. "Was it worth what it cost you?" The question landed in a place that most questions never reached. Claire sat with it for a moment, not performing consideration, actually considering it. The real version of the question, which was knowing what you know now, including the cost, would you make the same choices? "Yes," she said, without qualification. "How do you know that?" "Because the people who came home because of choices I made are living their lives, having children, calling their mothers in the morning, She paused. Torres's mother. The phone call. That doesn't go away. Whatever the cost was, that doesn't go away either. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. I want to be like that, she said, not with adolescent hero worship, with something more serious and more specific. I want to be the kind of person who can make that choice when it matters. How do you become that? You're already in the process, Claire said. You spent 24 hours with a textbook trying to understand something you'd gotten wrong. That's how it starts. Not with courage, with honesty. Vasquez stood up. She straightened. She looked at Claire with an expression that was trying to contain more than her 24 years had given her language for. Thank you, she said. Go sleep, Claire said. I need you functional tomorrow. She watched Vasquez walk away and sat for another minute in the empty corridor. She thought about the question. Worth it. She thought about the mission she couldn't name, the team she'd gotten out, the choice she'd made at the rope. She thought about the months of recovery and the surgical pain and the 45 seconds she allowed herself each time the feeling threatened to overwhelm the structure she'd built around it. Then she thought about Torres and Kowalski and Vasquez walking away with something she hadn't had when she came in. She stood up. She went back to work. That was the answer. Not in words, in motion. How? The message arrived at 0600 4 days later. It came through official channels, which was the form she had expected if it ever came. A routing code she recognized not from anything on the accessible record, but from her own operational history. The unwritten catalog of administrative signatures that meant a specific category of attention was being paid. Someone above this facility's awareness level had become aware of her. She read the message twice. She set it down. She picked it up and read it a third time. It was not threatening. It was not demanding. It was written in the precise, neutral language of institutional communication that carried its full meaning in what it didn't say. Someone at a level she didn't have a name for reviewing operational records she hadn't known were being reviewed had flagged her current assignment against her sealed history and generated a question. The question, stripped of its administrative language, was, this? Why is this person teaching when this person could be leading? She stared at the message for a long time. Because I'm not finished yet, she thought. Because there are people in this building who need what I know, and I'm not done giving it to them. Because this is the work. This is exactly the work. She folded the message. She put it in her pocket. She went to the equipment room to begin her morning check. 2 expired saline bags. She replaced them. She logged them. She moved on. But something had changed in the geometry of what was coming. She could feel it. The message meant that somewhere in the classified architecture of the system, she'd spent her adult life inside the truth about her was on the move. And when it arrived, when it fully arrived in all its dimensions, in front of all the people who had decided she was the injured woman on the sidelines, the ground beneath this facility was going to shift. She wasn't afraid of that. She was, if she was completely honest with herself, ready. She had been waiting long enough. The message stayed in her pocket for 3 days. Not because she was afraid of it, not because she didn't know what it meant. She kept it there the way you keep a stone in your hand when you're deciding something, not to look at it constantly, but to feel its weight while you think. On the morning of the 4th day, she burned it. Standard procedure for anything that carried routing codes from that level of the system. You didn't keep those documents. You read them, you understood them, you acted or you didn't, and then you destroyed the paper trail on your end, because the institutional trail existed in places you couldn't touch anyway. She watched it burn in the metal waste bin behind the equipment room and thought someone is coming. Not to punish her, not to reassign her, but to look at her. Really look the way people at that level looked at things, and to make a determination about what happened next. She had maybe 2 weeks. Maybe less. She went back inside and taught her morning class with the same precision she brought to every morning class, because the candidates in front of her didn't know about messages or routing codes or sealed operational histories, and what they needed from her had nothing to do with any of that. Kowalski found her at lunch. He was not a natural at emotional conversation. She could see him building toward it from 20 feet away. The particular stiffness of a large, physically confident man trying to navigate territory where physical confidence was useless. He set his tray down across from her without asking. She let him. "I looked you up," he said. "There isn't much to find. That's what I mean." He looked at her. He was 24 years old, and he had the kind of directness that hadn't yet been complicated by enough experience to make him cautious. "I searched your name through every accessible database I could reach. Normal personnel file, your medical instructor certification, some kind of commendation citation that's redacted down to basically just your name and a date." He paused. "The date is 6 years ago. The commendation category is blacked out. But the classification level on the redaction header is—" He stopped. "I've seen a lot of redacted files. I've never seen that classification level on a commendation before." Claire ate her food. She did not respond. "Who are you?" he said. Same question Hatcher had asked her. Different weight behind it, because Kowalski was asking it from a different place. Not from the authority of 19 years' experience, but from the rawness of someone whose map of the world had just been revised. "I'm your tactical medical instructor," she said. "That's not what I mean, and you know it. Kowalski." She set down her fork. "What happens in this conversation doesn't change what happens in training tomorrow. You understand that?" "Yeah." "Then ask your question." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Were you operational? Real operational. Not support, not observation. Operational." "Yes." He absorbed that. "For how long?" "Long enough." "What happened at the end, I mean? The injury?" "Is not something I'm going to discuss." He nodded. He accepted it. Then, "Does it bother you? Being here doing this while—" He gestured vaguely, meaning while other people are doing the work you used to do. She considered the question honestly because he'd asked it honestly. "No. This is the work. Different form, same purpose." "But people treat you like—" He stopped. "Like I'm finished," she said. "Yeah. People treated me like I was dangerous before I was injured. People treat everyone like something they've already decided before the person gets a chance to demonstrate the truth. That's just how human beings work. It's not interesting, and it's not personal, and I don't spend energy on it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said with the careful seriousness of someone who had thought about whether to say a thing and decided to say it anyway. "I'm sorry for what I said in the first week. The comment in the locker room. She'd heard the comment. She heard everything. He'd said something to the effect that she was a good teacher for someone whose best days were behind her. It hadn't surprised her. It hadn't particularly wounded her. But he had said it, and he knew she knew, and the apology was genuine, which made it matter. "You were wrong," she said. "You corrected the error. That's what training is for." He almost smiled. "Are you always this difficult to apologize to?" "Probably," she said. She picked her fork back up. "Eat your lunch. I need you functional at 1400. He ate. She ate. And somewhere in that ordinary functional silence was something that had not existed between them 3 weeks ago, a recognition mutual and unspoken that they were both more than the first version of each other they had each been willing to see. Reed called her into his office that afternoon. She had not been in his office before. It was the office of someone who managed their space the way they managed everything, organized to the point of control, everything in a designated position, nothing accidental. She noticed the photographs on the wall. Operational photos, the kind that made the cut because they were safe to display no sensitive material, no identifiable locations. Just the documentation of a career's worth of hard work and real service. She stood. He gestured at the chair across from his desk. She sat. "I received something this morning," he said. She was careful not to react. "From the Administrative Routing Office. A request to compile and forward a service record review package for personnel currently assigned to this unit." He folded his hands on the desk. "Normally that's routine. Normally I wouldn't mention it to the individual concerned." He looked at her steadily. "Yours has a different routing header than the others. I've seen that header once before in my career, and the person it was attached to turned out to have a history that went considerably beyond what the unit had been told. "What are you asking me, Captain?" "I'm asking if you're aware of this review." "I'm aware that reviews happen, Claire." It was the first time he'd used her first name. The shift was not accidental. He'd chosen it deliberately, which meant he was choosing to have a different kind of conversation than they'd had before. "I've been in this program for 4 years. I've seen a lot of people cycle through this unit. I know what tactical medical instructors look like. I know what their files look like, how they move, how they talk about their experience. You don't match any of it. You match something else, and I don't have a reference for what that is, which means it's something I haven't encountered before." He paused. "I'm not asking you to breach classification. I'm asking you to tell me to the degree that you're able whether what's in that routing is going to change what I think I know about this unit." She looked at him. He was a good officer. She had revised that assessment multiple times since the first week, always upward. He was direct, and he was honest, and he was capable of changing his mind, which was rarer than people pretended. He had said, "You're right," in a hallway, and meant it. He had trusted her radio call in the joint exercise without verification. He was asking now not out of ego, not out of territorial concern, but because he was genuinely trying to understand what he was responsible for. She owed him something. She decided what that something was. "The routing you received is connected to a review of my pre-injury service record," she said. "My pre-injury service record contains operational material that is classified above the clearance level of this facility. The review is standard for personnel in transitional assignments, whose classified history may be relevant to their current role." "Is it relevant?" he said. "Your classified history, is it relevant to your current role?" "Every day," she said. He sat with that. "How bad was it?" he said. "The operation that hurt you. How bad was it actually?" She looked at him for a long time. "I made a choice," she said, "between getting out and making sure everyone else got out first. The physical outcome of that choice is what you see now." She paused. "I would make the same choice tomorrow." Reed looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not pity, he was smart enough to know she'd reject pity before it landed. Not admiration exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked like the specific weight of a person confronting the gap between who they thought they were and who they actually are. "I was wrong about you," he said. "Not just in the first week. I've been wrong about you in ways I'm only starting to map. You're in process," she said. "That's what matters." He almost smiled, then more seriously. "When this review lands whatever it generates, I want you to know that this unit is behind you, whatever the outcome." "You don't know what the outcome is yet." "No. But I know what I've watched you do in this facility for 6 weeks, and that's enough." She stood. She straightened. Something in the architecture of the room had shifted, not in any physical way, but in the understanding between the two people in it. "I'll be at the 0600 session tomorrow," she said. "I'll be there," he said. "Ometariet." The session the next morning ran for 2 hours, and it was the best training she'd delivered since arriving at Little Creek. Not because anything external was different. The candidates were the same candidates. The material was the same material. But something had changed in the room's charge, some invisible current that moved between people when their understanding of each other has been revised. Kowalski worked with a focus she hadn't seen from him before. Reyes had found a speed she'd been holding back. Vasquez asked questions mid-exercise that demonstrated she was integrating the previous lesson's concepts in real time, which was the thing Claire most wanted to see from a candidate, not retention of information, but synthesis, the building of actual judgment. Reed stood at the back and watched in silence, not evaluating, witnessing. At the end of the session, as the candidates were clearing out, Hatcher fell in beside her. "The review," he said quietly. "Word travels." "Of course it does. The candidates are talking. Not the details, nobody has the details, but they know something is in motion." He looked at her sideways. "You're not worried?" "No." "Why not?" "Because it can't change anything that matters," she said. "The work I did was the work I did. The work I'm doing is the work I'm doing. No review changes either of those things. It could change your assignment. It could. That doesn't concern you. She thought about Vasquez asking her question in the corridor. About Kowalski at lunch, building his apology with the careful hands of someone unaccustomed to the material. About Torres's mother calling the clinic in the morning. "There's more to do here," she said. "I'm not finished." Hatcher nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say more and was deciding against it. She let him decide. The crisis announced itself without warning on a Thursday afternoon, the way real crises always did. It was not the review. It was not any of the things she'd been tracking in the peripheral awareness she maintained without thinking about it. It was something new, the category of event that didn't fit any existing pattern, and therefore required everything she had right now without preparation time. A candidate went down during a live fire range exercise. Not a training injury. An actual equipment failure. A malfunction in the range ventilation system that released carbon monoxide into an enclosed training space at levels that were not immediately lethal, but were building toward lethal faster than the standard emergency protocols were designed to address. By the time the ventilation failure was identified and the building was evacuating, 3 candidates were symptomatic. 1 was unconscious. Claire was outside the building when the alert came. She was inside before anyone had finished processing what was happening. "Morgan, the building isn't cleared!" The safety coordinator was shouting from behind her. "I know," she said, and kept moving. She reached the unconscious candidate, a first-phase kid named Alvarez, 19 years old, on the floor of the range's secondary corridor, and assessed him in 4 seconds. Breathing compromised. Pulse present. Oxygen saturation heading in the wrong direction. She had her airway kit open before she'd consciously made the decision to open it. Alvarez, stay with me. Stay." He was unresponsive. She adjusted his airway, managed his breathing manually, and started moving him toward the exit. Not dragging, not lifting carelessly, but moving with the specific geometry of someone who had learned to extract a body from a compromised environment while managing active medical intervention, which is a skill with very few applications outside of the exact type of operational environment she was not permitted to describe. She was 40 feet from the exit when Kowalski came back in. "I told them I forgot something," he said. He took Alvarez's other side without being asked. He didn't wait for instruction. He read her movement pattern and matched it in 3 seconds. "Pace me," she said. "I'm pacing you." They moved. The air was bad. She could feel it, the particular quality of CO poisoned air that doesn't announce itself until your body is already responding to it. She managed her breathing deliberately, keeping her oxygen consumption controlled, the way she'd been trained to in environments where the atmosphere itself was the threat. 20 feet. 10. They cleared the door. Outside, she handed Alvarez off to the emergency response team that had mobilized, gave them his presentation in 12 seconds timeline symptoms, airway status, intervention performed, and then stepped back. She leaned against the exterior wall. She breathed. Kowalski stood next to her. He was breathing harder than she was, she noticed. He was bigger and younger and faster, and he was breathing harder than she was. "How did you do that?" he said. "In there. The way you managed your breathing." "Trained response," she said. "From where?" She looked at him. "From where?" he said again, and his voice was different now, not interrogative, not curious in the casual sense. He was asking with the full weight of what he'd just watched her do in a CO-compromised environment, with a body across her shoulders, and never once breaking the controlled pattern of her movement. "From the kind of environments where the wrong answer to that question got people killed," she said. He stared at her. "You've been in operational scenarios with atmospheric threat." "I've been in a lot of scenarios." "That's not standard SEAL training." "No, that's..." He stopped. He looked at her with the expression of someone whose framework has just cracked. "That's a specific additional training track that only applies to operators cleared for..." He stopped again. He looked at her shoulder. He looked at her face. He made the connection. She could see him making the one she'd been watching people almost make for 6 weeks, and this time it went all the way. You weren't just SEAL cleared, he said. You were Kowalski. She said his name quietly. Whatever conclusion you're reaching, hold it. This is not the time. Alvarez was being loaded into the medical vehicle 20 feet away. She turned her attention there, which was where her attention needed to be. But she could feel Kowalski standing next to her holding the half-formed conclusion, and she knew that it wasn't going to stay half-formed for long. Alvarez survived. All 3 symptomatic candidates survived. The ventilation failure was traced to a maintenance error, a sealed bypass valve that had been improperly serviced 2 days earlier. The range was shut down pending full inspection. The incident report went up the chain with a thoroughness that matched the severity of what had almost happened. In the after-action review, Reed asked Claire to describe her intervention in detail. She did. She described her entry, her assessment of Alvarez, her airway management, the extraction procedure. She described it with the precision of someone reporting facts without drama, without editorializing. At a certain point, Commander Walsh, the base's senior operational officer, who had appeared for the after-action review, without advance notice, which was itself notable, leaned forward. Sergeant Morgan, Walsh said. He was 60 years old and had the quality of presence that came from having spent decades in positions where very serious decisions had been made. The extraction you performed on candidate Alvarez. Walk me through the breathing management specifically. She walked him through it. The room was completely silent. Walsh looked at her for a long time when she finished. His expression was neutral in the specific way of someone who is working very hard to keep it neutral. Where was that protocol developed? He said. I'm not at liberty to specify the development context, she said. Who cleared you for it? That information is classified above this facility's level. Walsh nodded slowly. He made a note on his pad. He looked at Reed, and the look they exchanged was one of those looks that contains a full conversation, a rapid recalibration of context, a shared recognition of something, a question about what happens next. Then Walsh said, still looking at Reed, "Pull the package." Reed's eyes moved to Claire. Walsh said, "Sergeant Morgan, I need you to remain available for a direct communication this evening. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." Walsh closed his notebook. That's all. The direct communication came at 1900. She sat in her quarters with the secure line in front of her and answered when it connected. The voice on the other end was not Walsh. She recognized the voice, but there was no point in naming it in her own mind or anywhere else. "Sergeant Morgan?" "Sir?" "The routing review has been accelerated." "I assumed it would be. Your record is going to be partially declassified for the purpose of this command's situational awareness. That means Commander Walsh and Captain Reed will be read into the operational context of your service history up to the level we've determined is appropriate. They will not have the full picture, but they will have enough." She sat with that for a moment. Enough. What was enough? "What specifically will they see?" she said. "The nature of your operational role. The duration of your active deployment period. The mission classification that corresponds to your injury event." A pause. "The commendation you refuse to accept formally." She had refused it because accepting it required a public record, and a public record required an acknowledgement of things that couldn't be acknowledged. She had made that choice clearly and without regret. "The commendation detail is necessary," she said. "It provides context for the nature of the choice you made. Walsh needs to understand the full weight of what you did in that last operation, as does Reed." "Why does Reed need to know?" A longer pause. "Because we're considering an expanded role for you at this facility. Reed is part of that consideration. His assessment of your capability is part of the file we're building." Another pause. "His initial assessment was not favorable." "He revised it. We know. We've been watching the revision." A beat. "Sergeant Morgan, are you prepared for the record to be partially opened?" She looked at the wall. She thought about the locked box in the bottom of the footlocker. The 3 photographs. The letter she had written herself in the hospital. The 45 seconds she allowed herself each time the feeling threatened the structure. "I've been prepared for a long time," she said. "Very well. Walsh will read Reed in tomorrow morning. Expect a meeting at 0900. The line went silent. She sat for a long moment in the quiet of her quarters, alone with the knowledge of what the next morning would bring. The ground was about to shift, not just for her, for Reed, who had been wrong and had started becoming right, for Hatcher, who had seen her earliest and most clearly, for Kowalski, who had gone back into a CO-filled building without being asked, for Vasquez, who wanted to know how you become the person who makes the hard choice. All of them tomorrow were going to learn the shape of the thing they had been standing next to all along. She wasn't afraid of that. She was finally, after a long time of holding everything in the carefully managed architecture of her silence, almost ready to be known. Not for recognition. Not for the commendation she'd refused. Not for the rank or the record, or any of the institutional acknowledgments that would come with the partial declassification, but because the people who were going to learn the truth were the people who deserved to know it, who had earned the knowing of it through the honest, difficult work of revising themselves. And because the truth, once it moved completely. She lay down in the dark and closed her eyes and waited for the morning to arrive. She was in the equipment room at 0530, same as every morning. Same check, same order, same methodical progression through every item in every kit, because the discipline of consistency was the only thing that made performance reliable under pressure, and she had learned that in environments where the alternative to reliable was fatal. But this morning her hands moved through the routine with a quality of attention that was slightly different. Not distracted, she was never distracted, but aware. Aware in the way you are aware on the morning of something significant when the world has not yet changed, but you know with certainty that it is going to. Hatcher found her at 0615. He came in without announcement, which was his way, and stood at the entrance to the storage corridor without speaking for a moment. "Walsh is in early," he said. "I know. Reed went into Walsh's office at 0550. The door's been closed since." He paused. "What's happening?" She continued her check. "Something that should have happened sooner." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have for you right now." She looked at him. "When it's done, you'll know what there is to know. Until then, do your job and let me do mine." He studied her face for a long moment with the particular attention of a man who has spent 19 years learning to read people under pressure. Whatever he saw there settled something in him, because he nodded once and left without pushing further. She finished the check. She logged it. She walked toward Walsh's building. She had not been summoned yet. The meeting was at 0900, but she was not a person who waited in her quarters for things to arrive. She positioned herself. She prepared the ground. She moved toward the moment rather than sitting still, while the moment moved toward her. She found a bench in the corridor outside Walsh's office and sat down and was still. Inside, through the closed door, she could hear the low register of voices, not the words, just the cadence. She knew the cadence of men receiving difficult information, the long pauses, the brief questions, the longer silences that came after specific revelations when the mind needed time to restructure around a new piece of reality. She waited. At 0847, the door opened. Walsh came out first. He looked at her with an expression she'd seen before, the expression of someone who has just been handed a much more complicated picture of a person than they had been working with and is still in the process of integrating it. He was 60 years old and had seen a great deal, and even so, there was something in his face that was working harder than usual. "Sergeant Morgan," he said. "Come in." Reed was standing when she entered, not at his desk, standing near the window with his arms at his sides and the posture of someone who had just received information that required a physical response he wasn't sure how to express. He looked at her when she came in, and the look was nothing like any look he had given her before. She sat when Walsh indicated the chair. Reed remained standing for a moment longer, then moved to his own chair and sat with the deliberate care of someone managing a feeling by managing their body. Walsh set a thin folder on the desk between them. Not her full file that was sealed and would remain so. A summary document. The partial declassification. She recognized the header format. "I'm going to tell you what we've been read in on," Walsh said, "and then I'd like you to speak to it as you feel appropriate. Not to breach anything, just to give the record a human voice, where the written account can't." He looked at her steadily. "Is that acceptable?" "Yes, sir." Walsh opened the folder. He read from it with the precision of a man who understood that every word in a document like this had been chosen carefully and deserved to be delivered carefully. He described the nature of her operational role, not the specific operations, not the locations, not the unit designations that would mean something to people with the right clearances, but the category of work, the tier level, the nature of the clearances involved. He described the duration of her active deployment period in terms that were accurate without being specific. Reed, listening, did not move. Walsh reached the section about the injury event. He paused before he read it, not for dramatic effect, but with the specific pause of someone acknowledging weight before they lift it. The summary described a mission in which extraction was compromised by enemy action. It described a situation in which 6 personnel had to be moved through an extraction corridor under active threat. It described a structural failure in the extraction apparatus. And it described the decision made by one member of the team to hold the failing apparatus manually at personal cost until all other personnel were clear. Walsh stopped reading. The room was quiet. Reed said very quietly, "The rope." She looked at him. "The injury to your shoulder," he said. "It's consistent with that load held at that angle against that resistance." He stopped. He was doing the physics of it, she realized. He was a physical man who understood the mechanics of bodies under strain, and he was calculating what it had taken to hold 6 people's weight on a compromised line and what it had done to the shoulder that held it. His face went through something she had not expected to see on him. "You held it," he said. "You held the whole—" He stopped again. "How long?" "Long enough," she said. "The report says 4 minutes and 17 seconds, Walsh said quietly. Reed closed his eyes briefly. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of holding the dead weight of a collapsing extraction against a joint that wasn't designed for that load under conditions that made letting go the only rational option while 6 people got out on the other side of the decision. Walsh let the silence hold for a moment. Then, "There's a commendation on record, classified." Sergeant Morgan declined formal presentation. Reed opened his eyes. He looked at her. "Why?" "Because formal presentation required documentation that would have identified the mission parameters. I wasn't willing to do that." "So you refused the recognition to protect the classification." "I refused it to protect the people the classification protected." He sat with that. She watched him sitting with it and understood what was happening inside him, the complete dismantling of the first reading he had made of her, and the reconstruction of something larger and more accurate in its place. It was not a comfortable process. She had watched it happen to people before. It required a kind of intellectual honesty that not everyone was capable of, and she respected him for being capable of it. "I told you," he said, in front of 42 candidates to teach from the sidelines. "Yes." "I said your injury revealed a limitation." "Yes." "And you—" He paused. "You just let me say it. You were the commanding officer of this unit. It wasn't my place to argue. It was your place to tell me I was wrong." "No," she said simply. "It was your place to discover you were wrong. I can't do that for you. Nobody can do that for another person. You have to walk into the error yourself and feel it and come back from it. That's the only way the correction means anything." Walsh was watching this exchange with the particular stillness of a senior officer who has decided the most important thing he can do in this moment is not interfere with it. Reed looked at her for a long time. "The candidates," he said. "The things you've been teaching them, the interventions, the corrections. All of it comes from operational experience that I told you was insufficient." "Yes." "And instead of proving me wrong, I just kept working," she said. "The work was always the argument. I didn't need to make it verbally. He nodded. He looked at the table. He was doing something internal that she recognized, the specific accounting process of a person who is honest enough to look at their errors without making them smaller than they were. I'm going to stand in front of this unit, he said, and tell them that I was wrong about you. Specifically, with the details, the parts that I'm cleared to share. She shook her head. Don't. He looked up. Why not? Because making a public correction of a public error calls attention to the error in a way that doesn't serve the candidates. What serves the candidates is the corrected behavior going forward, not the announcement of the correction. People need to know. People need to see you treating me correctly, she said. They don't need to hear you explain it. Explanation is for the person doing the correcting. Demonstration is for everyone watching. She paused. You're a good officer. Show them what a good officer looks like when he's been wrong. Don't tell them. Walsh made a sound. Not quite a word. The sound of a man recognizing something being said with precision that deserved acknowledgement. Reed looked at her. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. With the weight of someone accepting a difficult instruction from an unexpected source. Walsh dismissed them at 0940. Reed walked with her into the corridor. They moved in silence for a few steps, and the silence was different from any silence that had existed between them before. Not the silence of managed distance, not the silence of withheld information, but the silence of two people who now understood each other and were adjusting to what that felt like. There's something I need to ask you, Reed said, and I need you to tell me the truth without managing my reaction. Ask it. When you came to this unit, was any part of it punishment? The assignment, was it given to you as a consequence? She understood the question. He was asking whether she'd been sidelined, whether the teaching role was at some institutional level, a form of professional exile dressed up as continued service. No, she said. I requested it. He stopped walking. You requested this assignment? Yes. Why? Because the candidates in this program are going to go into situations that will kill them if they haven't been properly prepared. And the preparation they receive determines whether they come home. I spent years in those situations. I know what the gaps in the standard training create. I came here to close the gaps. He stared at her. You could have gone anywhere. With your history, they would have given you, I know what they would have given me. She looked at him. I didn't want it. I wanted this. He was quiet for a long time. The message you received, he said finally. The routing review. The expanded role they're considering. He paused. Is that something you want? She had been thinking about this since the secure call. Since the voice on the line had said expanded role, and she had sat in the quiet of her quarters turning it over. It depends on what it means for the candidates, she said. I think it means you'd have more of them, more access, more authority over the curriculum. He paused. I think it means what you've been doing here gets recognized as what it actually is. I don't need the recognition. Maybe the candidates do, he said. Maybe they need to see that someone like you exists, what that looks like, what's possible. He looked at her steadily. You changed things in this unit, Morgan. Without trying to. Without making it about yourself. You just worked. And the work changed things. She let that land. She let it be real for a moment without deflecting it. Kowalski came back into the building, she said. During the CO incident. He came back in without being asked. I know. That's not me. That is him. Whatever I gave him, he made the choice with it. That belongs to him. Yes, Reed said. And it also belongs to whoever taught him that going back was possible. She stood with that for a moment. I'll consider the expanded role, she said. It was the closest she had come in 6 weeks to saying yes to something larger than the immediate work in front of her. Hatcher heard everything by mid-afternoon. Not from Walsh's summary, not from the partial declassification. She knew the chain of formal communication would take days to reach him. He heard it the way everything real traveled through a unit person to person, piece by piece, the parts that could be shared, moving through the network of people who had earned the trust to receive them. He found her in the medical supply room at 15:30, reorganizing the secondary kit storage because she had found another protocol gap in the rotation schedule, and correcting it required physically restructuring the shelf layout. 4 minutes and 17 seconds, he said. She kept working. You held a collapsing extraction line for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The report is accurate. Claire. He never used her first name. She registered it and kept working. Look at me. She looked at him. His face was doing something complicated. Hatcher was not a man who showed feeling easily. 19 years had given him a control over his expressions that was close to professional. But right now, the control was working hard against something that was bigger than it. I knew, he said, from the first day. I knew there was something behind you that didn't match the story. I knew when I watched you work, Torres. I knew when you caught the intelligence failure in the joint exercise. I kept asking you, and you kept giving me the same answer, and I respected the wall, and I'm... He stopped. I'm glad you're alive, he said. That's what I'm trying to say. Whatever that mission was, whatever it cost you, I'm glad the outcome was that you're standing in this supply room on a Thursday afternoon reorganizing kit storage. She was quiet for a moment. The statement reached somewhere that most statements didn't reach. Thank you, she said. And she meant it fully, without management, without the layer of professional distance she usually kept between herself and expressions of genuine feeling. What happens now? He said. Tomorrow's session runs at 0600. I need those secondary kits reorganized before then. He almost laughed. I mean with the review, the expanded role. I'm considering it. What does that mean for this unit? I don't know yet, but if it happens... She paused. You'd have more of the same, more sessions, more pressure on the candidates, more closing of the gaps. The candidates can handle it. Some of them can. She moved another kit to the revised position. Vasquez can. Kowalski is getting there. Reyes already could and didn't know it. And the ones who can't, they find out now here where finding out doesn't kill anyone, she said. That's the entire point. He helped her reorganize the remaining kits without being asked. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, comfortable in it, the silence of two people who had arrived at the kind of understanding that doesn't need continuous verbal maintenance. The candidates found out at 1700, not through an announcement, not through any formal channel. They found out the way people find out the things that actually shape them through each other, through the rapid compression of real information moving through a group of people who were smart enough to understand what it meant. By 1800, the dynamic in the unit had changed. She felt it at dinner. The particular quality of attention when she entered the room, not the studied casual ignore of the first weeks, not the polite but distant acknowledgement of the middle weeks. Something else. The kind of attention that comes when a group of people has revised their understanding of someone and hasn't yet developed the social language for the revision. Kowalski stood up when she walked past his table. Not in a formal way, just stood. And then Reyes stood, and then 3 others, and it moved through the room in a wave that was not orchestrated and not performative, just the instinctive physical response of people recognizing something. She stopped. She looked at them. Sit down, she said. Not harshly, with the same quiet authority she applied to everything. You're in a dining facility. Eat your food. They sat. She moved to her table. She ate. But something in her chest was doing something it didn't usually do during a meal. Something warm and complex and difficult to categorize neatly. She filed it. She let it be. She didn't try to manage it into something smaller. Vasquez appeared at her table 10 minutes later. She sat across from Claire without asking which she had learned to do from watching Kowalski do it, and she set her tray down and ate for a moment in silence. Then, is it true what they're saying? What are they saying? That you held the line. That you were the one who... Vasquez stopped. Try differently. That the reason 6 people came home from a classified operation is because you made a choice to stay behind. Claire looked at her. She considered the various ways to respond to this, and chose the one that was most honest. Something like that, she said. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. You told me that strength starts with honesty. That the way to become the person who makes the hard choice is to start with being honest about what you got wrong. She looked at her tray, then back up. I've been thinking about that every day since you said it. Good. Why didn't you tell us? Vasquez said. About your history. We would have. What? Claire said. Treated me differently. Yes. That's why, Claire said simply. I didn't come here to be treated differently. I came here to teach you. The teaching doesn't change based on who you think I am. It's the same regardless. The information is the same. The drills are the same. The corrections are the same. She paused. The only thing that changes when you know my history is how you receive the teaching. And I needed you to receive it on its own terms first. Vasquez sat with that. You knew we'd find out eventually, she said. I knew the work would speak first. The rest was always going to come later. And now that it has, Claire looked at her. Now you take everything you've already learned and you build on it. With or without knowing my history, you still corrected the documentation error. You still spent 24 hours with 3 textbooks. You still asked the right question in the corridor at 2200. She paused. That was you. That's always been you. Vasquez's jaw tightened in the specific way of someone receiving something they needed but hadn't expected. Okay, she said. Not small, not casual, with full weight. She finished her dinner and left. And Claire sat alone at her table in a room full of people who now knew something about her that she had not told them, that she had let arrive through its own motion, and she felt the specific quiet of a person who has been known not completely, not in every dimension, but genuinely in the ways that mattered, and has found that being known is not the exposure she had spent years bracing against. It was something else entirely. It was, she understood, sitting very still in the dining facility at Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, Little Creek, Virginia, with her food getting cold and 41 candidates rearranging their understanding of the world around a woman they'd been looking past for 6 weeks. It was a beginning, not an ending, not a resolution. A beginning, the kind that only arrives after you've done enough of the quiet, unrecognized work that the recognition, when it finally comes, lands in ground that's been properly prepared to receive it. She finished her food. She cleared her tray. She went back to her quarters. Tomorrow, 0530. Equipment room. Same check. Same order. And everything different. She was in the equipment room at 0530. Same time. Same check. Same order. But the room felt different, and she knew why she was different in it. Not in any way that changed the procedure. Not in any way that softened the precision she brought to every item in every kit. But something had settled inside her overnight, the way ground settles after a significant shift. Not collapsed, not broken. Just finally at rest in the configuration it had always been moving toward. She found nothing wrong this morning. Every kit complete. Every expiration date current. Every tourniquet windlass intact. The room had been properly maintained, and she registered that without ceremony, the way you register any evidence that what you've been building is taking hold. She closed the last kit. She stood in the quiet for a moment. Then Vasquez walked in, not hesitantly, not with the performance of someone who'd rehearsed their entrance. Just directly the way Vasquez did everything when she was certain of a decision. I need 10 minutes before the session, she said. You have 7, Claire said. Talk. Vasquez set something on the equipment table. A notebook spiral bound the pages dense with handwriting that Claire could see even from a distance, was systematic, structured, the notes of someone who had been processing information with genuine rigor. I've been writing down everything, Vasquez said. Every correction you've made since the first week. Every drill, every debrief, every conversation. Not for a report, not for anyone else. For me. She paused. I went back through it last night after dinner. All of it. And I found a pattern. Claire waited. Every single correction you've made in this unit, Vasquez said, comes back to one thing. Not technique, not protocol, not even decision-making exactly. She stopped, looked at her notebook, looked back up. Every correction is about the gap between what someone thinks is happening and what's actually happening. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. Claire looked at her. Every time Kowalski made an error, it was because he thought he was in control of a situation he wasn't reading correctly. Every time the Eastern element failed in the joint exercise, it was because they were responding to a picture that didn't match reality. Torres collapsed because the people around him thought it was exhaustion, and it wasn't. Vasquez's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, the particular energy of a person who has understood something for the first time fully and completely. And the understanding has changed the shape of everything. You teach one thing. You teach people how to see what's actually there instead of what they're expecting to see. The silence held for a moment. And none of us were seeing what was actually there, Vasquez said. With you. We were seeing what we expected. And you let us. You let us look past you because you knew the work would eventually correct the picture. Claire picked up her kit bag. That's 9 minutes of material in 7 minutes of delivery. You're getting faster. Is that a yes, that I'm right? That's a yes that you've been paying attention. She moved toward the door. Don't stop. Vasquez picked up her notebook and followed, and Claire felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel cleanly, the specific satisfaction of watching a person arrive at the truth of a thing through their own intelligence without being handed it. That was what she'd come here for. Sat. The morning session was different from the start. She felt it the moment she walked onto the training ground. The candidates assembled with a quality of attention she hadn't seen from them before. Not the edgy, performance-conscious attention of people trying to look capable, but something quieter and more real. The attention of people who had revised their understanding of where they were and what was being asked of them. Kowalski was in the front. He'd always been in the front. He was big and fast and led with his body. But this morning, he was standing differently. She couldn't have explained the difference to anyone who wasn't trained to notice it. It was in the set of his shoulders, the angle of his attention, the specific quality of stillness that a person develops when they've stopped performing readiness and started actually possessing it. Reyes was beside him, methodical as always, but there was a looseness in her posture that hadn't been there a week ago. The looseness of someone who has stopped being afraid of their own slowness and started trusting their own thoroughness. Different thing. Better thing. She ran the session hard, not harder than before. Same standards, same expectations. But with the particular directness that comes when you no longer need to establish authority before you can exercise it. The authority was established. The relationship between instructor and candidates had been through enough friction and enough truth that it had arrived somewhere real. She could work from that place without the overhead of proving herself, and the extra bandwidth went directly into the quality of what she was teaching. 45 minutes in, she ran a scenario she'd been holding back. A 3-casualty mass trauma event with deliberately incomplete information resource constraints. She didn't announce until mid-scenario, and a communication failure built in at the point when the candidates would most need to coordinate. It was the hardest scenario she'd run in 6 weeks. She watched what it revealed. Kowalski went to Reyes first, not to take over her position, to ask what she needed. She'd never seen him do that before. She noted it. Vasquez made a call that surprised her. Not a textbook call, not the protocol call, but the situationally correct call, the one that required reading the specific configuration of the problem, rather than matching it to a pattern she'd memorized. The call that required seeing what was actually there. Claire said nothing. She let it run. When it was done, she stood in front of them and delivered the debrief with the precision she always brought to it, specific, honest, without softening the errors or inflating the successes. But at the end, she added something she didn't usually add. "Vasquez," she said. Vasquez looked at her. The call you made at the 9-minute mark. Walk the group through it. Vasquez did. She explained her reasoning not defensively, not with the performance of someone seeking validation, but with the clarity of someone who understood their own decision well enough to teach it. The room listened. She saw candidates filing it the specific way. Good candidates absorb a lesson when it comes from a peer rather than an instructor, which is differently and sometimes more permanently. When Vasquez finished, Claire looked at the group. That, she said, is what 9 weeks of paying attention produces. Remember what it sounds like. She dismissed the session. Reed, who had been standing at the back, caught her eye as the group dispersed. He looked at her with an expression that had nothing complicated in it, just clear, unqualified respect. She nodded at him once and moved on. Walsh summoned her at 1100. His office had the particular atmosphere of rooms where decisions that affect many people get made not formal exactly, but weighted. He was behind his desk. He had a document in front of him that she recognized from its formatting as an official assignment modification. "Sit down, Sergeant Morgan." She sat. "The expanded role," he said. "We've made a determination." He paused. "It's substantial. I want to walk you through it before you decide." "I'm listening." "The role is a new position. It doesn't currently exist in the organizational structure, which means we're creating it specifically. Tactical integration. Instructor, senior grade. What that means practically, you would have curriculum authority across all phases of the training program. Not just medical. All tactical instruction. You would have direct input into scenario design, candidate evaluation, and program development." He paused. "You would be the person I consult before we change anything in the training structure." She was quiet. "Your clearance status would be maintained at its current level, which means you bring the full depth of your operational experience to the design work without being constrained by what you can share verbally." He looked at her. "We'd build the program around what you know, not around what you're permitted to say." She absorbed that, the structure of it, the precision of it. Someone at a level above Walsh had thought carefully about how to use her without putting her in an impossible position. "Why now?" she said. "The position could have been created 6 weeks ago, 2 years ago." Walsh looked at her with something that was close to candor. "Because 6 weeks ago we didn't know with certainty that you'd stay. And 2 years ago," he paused, "2 years ago, the institutional will to create this position didn't exist. The incident report from the CO event, combined with the review of your record, created a documentation trail that gave the people who needed to act a clear basis to act on." He folded his hands. "Your being here doing what you've been doing in the way you've been doing it built the case." She looked at the document on his desk. The whole shape of the last 6 weeks moved through her at once. The equipment room at 05:30, the expired saline bags, the tourniquets she'd replaced without telling anyone the simulation. She'd interrupted Reed's face in the corridor. After "you're right." Torres on the ground. Kowalski going back into the CO building. Vasquez's notebook, the 4-minute 17-second detail in the partial declassification document. The voice on the secure line saying, "expanded role." All of it had been moving toward this desk, this document, this moment. She had not planned it. She had just worked. And the work had built something without her managing it into existence. "I'll take it," she said. Walsh nodded once. He picked up a pen. He signed the document. He slid it across the desk. She signed it. The position existed. She told Hatcher at lunch. He listened to the full description of the role without interrupting, which was how she knew it was hitting him at a depth that went beyond professional interest. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, curriculum authority across all phases. "Yes. That means you'll be in every candidate's training from week 1. That's the intent. Claire." He said her name the same way he had in the equipment room, with the weight of a person for whom the name carries more than its syllables. "That is..." He stopped. He was not a man who said things he hadn't fully thought. He waited until he had it. "That's exactly the right call, the right structure. The right person in the right place. He paused. I wish it had happened sooner. It happened when it happened, she said. The candidates I've had for 6 weeks were the right candidates to have first. They needed to not know who I was. They needed to learn without the noise of my history around them. The timing was right. He looked at her. You're not going to let yourself want things to have been different, are you? No, she said. That's a waste of energy. I know. I still think someone should be angry on your behalf. Feel free, she said. On your own time. He almost laughed. Almost. But the thing underneath it was too heavy for a full laugh, and they both knew it, and they let it be what it was. Reed found her in the corridor at 1400. He had clearly been looking for her. He had the directed purpose of someone who has made a decision about a conversation and is committed to having it. I heard about the role, he said. Walsh signs things quickly. It's the right decision. He paused. I want to say something, and I want to say it correctly, so I'm going to take a minute. She waited. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. When I told you to teach from the sidelines, when I said what I said in front of those 42 candidates, I was making a judgment based on what I could see. And what I could see was incomplete. I've been in this program 4 years, and I thought I could read people with a high degree of accuracy, and I was wrong about you in a way that was specific, measurable, with consequences. Reed, I'm not done. He said it without heat, just with the quiet firmness of someone who needs to finish what they've started. The consequences weren't just professional, they were personal. I told a person who had given more than I will probably ever be asked to give that she should move to the edge of the room, and she let me say it. And she kept working, and the work... He stopped. He looked away for a moment, looked back. The work made me into someone who knew better, and I don't know how to say thank you for that without it sounding like not enough. She looked at him for a long moment. It's enough, she said. It's not. It's enough, she said again. Because you're going to take what you've learned from being wrong about me, and you're going to apply it to the next person you almost look past, and the one after that. The lesson you carry forward is the thank you. Everything else is just words. He stood very still. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. Clean, direct, without ceremony. I'll be in your first curriculum review session, he said. Whatever day you set it. Monday 0800, she said. Don't be late. He almost smiled. I won't be. He walked away, and she watched him go, and she thought that is what genuine accountability looks like when it lives in a person who is honest enough to carry it. Not an apology repeated until it becomes self-indulgent. Just the changed behavior going forward every day. That evening, she opened the locked box. She hadn't planned to. She didn't open it on a schedule. She opened it when something in her needed the weight of the photographs and the letter to stay calibrated. And something in her needed it tonight. Not because she was unsteady, but because she was steady in a new way, and she wanted to be present for that in front of the people who had made the steadiness possible. She looked at the 3 photographs. The 6 faces. She had heard from 2 of them in the past year, brief careful communications through channels that maintained the appropriate separation. Both alive, both well. One of them she had learned had a daughter born 8 months ago. A daughter. She held that. She picked up the letter she had written herself in the hospital. She didn't read it because she knew every word of it. She had read it often enough that the sentences lived in her the way Scripture lives in people who have returned to it through difficult seasons. She just held it. The injury is not the end of the story. It is the turning point. She folded it. She put it back. She closed the box. Then she did something she had not done in a very long time. She let herself feel without management, without the 45-second limit, without the careful structural containment she'd built around the feeling. She let herself feel the full weight of where she had arrived. The 6 weeks. The equipment room. The candidates. Vasquez's notebook. Kowalski going back into the building. Torres surviving. The partial declassification. Reed's face in Walsh's office when Walsh read the 4-minute 17-second detail. The signed document on Walsh's desk. The new position that did not exist until today. She let all of it be real at once. It was a lot. It was more than she was accustomed to letting be real at once. She sat with it for a long time in the quiet of her quarters, and she did not try to make it smaller, and she did not file it before she'd fully felt it. Then, when it had been given its full due, she filed it. And she went back to work. Monday came. 05:30. Equipment room. Same check. Same order. She found one cracked buckle on a kit bag strap and replaced it. She logged it. She moved on. At 0800, the curriculum review session began. Reed was there. Hatcher was there. 2 senior instructors who had watched the last 6 weeks from a distance and had formed private assessments that they were now prepared to voice in the presence of someone with the authority to act on them. A junior instructor named Carpenter, 27 years old, who had been assigned to the program 4 months ago and had been making small, consistent errors in his session design that nobody had formally corrected. Claire had her materials. Not a presentation, she didn't do presentations. Just organized notes, the accumulated product of 6 weeks of observation analysis, and the specific knowledge base of someone who had been in the places the candidates were going to go and knew exactly what the gaps in their preparation would cost them. She started talking. She talked for 3 hours. She talked about the documentation gap in Phase 2 medical protocol. She talked about the intelligence reading deficit in the scenario design, the way the current structure trained candidates to solve problems with good information and left them underprepared for the far more common condition of making calls with incomplete and stale information. She talked about the physical conditioning program's failure to account for sustained cognitive load during physical stress, which was the actual condition of field operations and bore almost no resemblance to the clean sequential separation between physical and mental demands that the current training assumed. She talked about Kowalski's error in Week 1 and what it revealed about the gap between procedural retention and situational judgment. She talked about Vasquez's call in the final scenario and what it demonstrated about what was possible when that gap was closed. She talked about Alvarez, who was recovered and had been cleared to return to training. She talked about what the CO incident had revealed about the candidate's emergency response decision-making and what the current curriculum did and did not do to build that decision-making. She talked about what she had seen in the last 6 weeks and what it told her about what needed to change, and specifically how. The room listened, not politely, not with the managed attention of people sitting through a required session, with the focused, forward-leaning engagement of people receiving information they needed. Reed asked 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them revealing that he had absorbed what she was saying at a structural level and was already thinking about implementation. Hatcher asked 2. His second one about resource constraints in the Phase 1 redesign led to a 20-minute conversation that produced a solution neither of them had come in with, which was what good sessions produced. Carpenter, the young instructor, said very little. But she watched him listening, and she recognized the specific quality of his attention, the attention of someone who is realizing in real time that they have been doing something wrong in a way they hadn't understood was wrong, and who is already beginning to correct it internally before the session ends. That was the thing she most wanted to see, not agreement, not deference. The self-correction of someone who has been given the right information and has the integrity to act on it. At 1100 she wrapped it. Monday next week, same time, she said. I'll have the Phase 2 revision drafted. I need feedback before it goes to Walsh. People gathered their materials. The room did the thing rooms do at the end of sessions where something real has happened, the slightly slower dispersal, the small conversations that start because people aren't quite ready to leave the charge of the space. Reed was the last to leave. He stood at the door. He paused. That was the best 3 hours I've spent in this program. We have a lot of work to do, she said. I know. He said it with something that was not reluctance. That was anticipation. I'll have notes on the Phase 1 gap assessment by Thursday. Wednesday, she said. He looked at her. A beat, then Wednesday. He left. She stood alone in the room for a moment. She thought about a young woman who had entered the Navy at 22 with a biochemistry degree and a physical assessment score in the top 4%. She thought about the years that followed the training, the deployments, the work that couldn't be named, the places that couldn't be located on any map she was permitted to show the 6 faces in the photographs, the rope, the hospital, the 41 weeks of physical therapy, the car in the mornings. She thought about the equipment room at 0530, the expired saline bags she'd replaced on the first morning without telling anyone, the cracked tourniquet windlass, the small invisible corrections that had preceded everything else. She thought about what Vasquez had said: you teach one thing. You teach people how to see what's actually there instead of what they're expecting to see. She had been here 6 weeks. She was going to be here much longer. And every candidate who passed through this program for as long as she had the strength and the clearance and the will to stand in front of them was going to leave, having been taught by someone who had gone all the way in and come back with the real knowledge. Not the textbook version, not the classroom version. The version that existed in places that couldn't be named in operations, that couldn't be described in the specific and irreducible truth of what human beings were capable of when they stopped calculating the cost and simply chose. That was what she had to give. She had been giving it from the moment she arrived in every corrected tourniquet and every interrupted drill and every 45-second conversation in every corridor. And she was going to keep giving it every morning at 0530 until the work was done. The work was never done. That was the only part of the job she had ever truly loved. She picked up her materials. She walked out of the room. She walked toward the next thing. She had never been the injured woman on the sidelines. She had always been exactly this, the person who saw what was actually there, who stayed when staying was hard, who built something durable out of the wreckage of what other people called an ending. Claire Morgan was not a survivor of what had happened to her. She was the proof that it had never been enough to stop her.